Yes, I suppose in many ways it was a very happy time because we didn't realise that there was a war on. It seemed very remote to us until Fradley Aerodrome arrived, and that had a profound effect on me personally. Airmen were billeted in the village, and so we suddenly found ourselves with a lot of blue uniforms, and we could no longer go to Fradley to go to the to wander through by the canal and cross that bridge into Fradley, because it was now a military area. And I guess I can remember people going away to fight in the services, and there was very little traffic. We used to play football and cricket, and just down for a post office lane we played football and cricket, and the game never stopped. It was continuous. You got up in the morning, you went out and you joined the game, and you came in for your lunch at some stage, and then you went back and you joined the game, and it was a continuous happy time. But that's all we did. We didn't have too many toys, we never went anywhere, and yet through that, looking back, I can say it was a fairly happy childhood.
Good. And how do you feel about talking about your family? The things that you told me about your family, how do you feel about?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah. So you mean about my mother and?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Well, do you want to closer in, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Of course, there was a downside to all this. Although we welcomed these servicemen into the village, in the case of my family, it was very traumatic because we had airmen were billeted with us, which I think we had to have, and that caused a breakdown with the relationship between my mother and father, and my mother left, and later on my father married an airwoman who would come to stay with us. So from a family point of view, that was quite a traumatic time. We lived in Post Office Lane, right at the end of Post Office Lane before you come to the bridge, and it was a semi-detached house, if I remember, with 4 bedrooms, and that was one of the reasons why we had people billeted in our house. And of course from there we could walk over Gaskell's Bridge to the canal, where if we weren't playing football or cricket we could fish, and then we walked down Mill End and turn right and along to the river where we learnt to swim. As I said earlier, we never went anywhere. All that we did was centred around the village.
Great, lovely.
Yeah. Towards the end of the war, I went to Lichfield, to the grammar school, and there we had the arrival of the Americans, and I distinctly remember them coming in by train to Lichfield station. I guess there were hundreds of them. They had their kit bags. I could remember them throwing their kit bags from the top level to the bottom, and people shouting out saying, "Hey, watch it, there's whiskey in that." And then on in the evenings, sadly, there was a great influx of women of all shapes and sizes who would go to the area just outside the station where the American troops would come in, and they would fraternise. And I guess this is one of the sad things about war, that this sort of thing goes on. And so for a young lad, seeing all this, I began to wonder, well, you know, what's this all about?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I remember one day when, I don't know what year it would be, but I guess we were short of metal that was required to make all the munitions and articles of war. And so there was a group came into the village, and anybody who had an iron fence or an iron gate, all these things were, they had the oxyacetylene torches and things, and all these things were removed. And so the village looked a different place without its fences and its gates. That he remembers it. We also had Italian prisoners of war here, and I don't know where they were billeted or anything about them, but on one occasion my brother and I, we walked to Witchner, and as we got to the just by the church there, where we left the canal path to go up to the church, I don't know why we went up there, there was a group of Italian prisoners there who were working in the fields there, and we noticed that they were cooking their meal, and the smell was so desirable. We thought, wow. So we went over to have a look, and we said to ourselves, these Italian prisoners are living better than we are, and they're prisoners, and we're winning the war. Vegetables.
Yes, you have.
Have I mentioned that?
No, you haven't. You did
Yeah,
mention it. You
yeah,
mentioned it.
yeah. Okay. The other thing that was a feature in those days was growing one's own vegetables. There was a slogan came out which said "Dig for victory." So all the flower borders seemed to disappear, and everyone was keen gardeners, and so you grew your own veg. I remember my father had a large garden at the back, which was, I guess he was more or less producing all that we needed in the way of vegetables. And of course people bred their own chickens, a few chooks, and that was quite a thing. And I think there was a fair amount of bartering was going on with those sort of things. And people reared their own pigs, and I can still hear the noise of the pigs when they were slaughtered, because I think they stabbed them in the neck and they bled to death, and you could hear them squealing. But that's and of course we reared our own rabbits, and you had a pet rabbit, and after a few months your pet rabbit, you discovered you were having it for your Sunday lunch. Yeah, that was yeah, towards the end. And when I went to the grammar school, which was about 1944, I think, 45, we found that our October half-term holiday, instead of having a week, it was extended to 2 weeks, and that was to allow us all to go spud picking, because the potatoes were ready for picking, and there was no one to pick them, And so off we went, allowed this fortnight to do this back-breaking job of picking these spuds. And it was hard work, but it was very well paid. And I can remember my father saying to me, well, don't start telling my men, my father was a local coal merchant, don't start telling my men how much you're earning spud picking, because you're getting nearly as much as they are for carrying bags of coal.
And you okay?
Yes, I'm fine, yeah. Yeah. Of course, in those days, life was very much bound up with a church. I sang in the choir, and we would go to church twice every Sunday. And one of the things that we looked forward to was hearing the church bells, because the order went out that church bells would not be rung unless there was an invasion. And so for years we waited and waited and say, what are the church bells really like when they ring? And it wasn't until the war was over that we had this great thrill of actually hearing the church bells being rung. No, you mentioned people from West Brom.
Yes.
And I checked with my friend, and he said, yes, it was correct. And he said that the school, they had to finish school at, I don't know, 2 o'clock or something, for the other kids to come in. But he reckons that there were some people who actually stayed in the village. But I've no recollection of that.
I think there were. Some people have mentioned.
They've said
to us.
people whose children whose parents were perhaps killed in air raids
Right,
sometimes
stayed on. Yeah, yeah.
We actually found somebody in West Brom
Yeah,
who'd been evacuated here. And I
right.
went over to see him. But unfortunately, they were only here for a month and he couldn't remember
Oh, right. Yeah.
anything about it.
There was one thing that, I don't know whether it's of any interest, but my grandfather had, as you come over, not Gaskell's Bridge, the next bridge, the other bridge, as you come over from King's Bromley, and you turn right down that little passageway where a doctor lives now. There's a big house there, and my grandfather bought that, and he had all his children would come out from Birmingham while the air raids were on and spend the night there. But whether that's of any interest, I don't know.